although my phone died on me last Monday. I hate phones and didn't really want one, but I got it. But after it died, I was like, man, I can't hardly do without that thing. I got to have one now. So it took me all week to get it back and try to get everything going again. But maybe we'll get it. All right, good to see everybody here tonight. As y'all know, I think it was announced this morning for sure that Ben would not be here tonight. He's at Maplewood this week. So he had asked me if I could fill in for him, so we'll do the best we can. But appreciate everybody being out tonight and coming to our class. I've been in this class, so I kind of know what's going on. But really enjoyed what we've been learning about the life of David, and we'll try to carry on with that tonight. Before we get started, do we have any prayer requests or anything we need to remember? Anybody? The Clemens family. Of course, our folks that are away in Africa, and also the ones who are at Maywood this week. A lot of this time of year, a lot of people on the road traveling here and there in vacations, visiting family, so probably just our travelers. A lot of times we pray for things, people who need help, but I get a plus for some who didn't need help. But I have a cousin who's an over-the-road truck driver, and he, about 2 weeks ago, I guess, he was down on I-22 getting over close to the Mississippi line around Hamilton over there, and the steering, something broke on his truck anyway and just lost it, and it crashed, and it was bad. Took them over 2 hours to cut him out, but once they cut him out, he got up and walked over to the gurney. He had a concussion and a bad gash on his head, and that was it. Amazing. He's also one of those folks who seems to be on about his 8.5 life. He's had so many things happen to him, he come out smelling like a rose. So, but once more he did. But good Lord watches out for us. He could have very easily not got out of that one alive. So, a lot of prayer for thankfulness for when things we don't have terrible things happen to us. Okay, Brother Liam, you don't mind letting us in opening prayer tonight? You lead us in opening prayer. All right, we're going to start back a little bit in 2 Samuel chapter 12 is where we had taught last week, and I think, we kind of got through, but we kind of pushed it to get through, I think, that chapter last week. But we're going to go back a little bit. I know I was mowing grass yesterday, and I was thinking about teaching, and mowing's a good time to clear your mind and start thinking about things. But I was thinking, I always overlap just a little bit to sure I don't miss something where I went last time. So we'll go back and overlap just a little bit where we were last time. In chapter 12, let's jump down. Really, we're going to start in about verse 10 there, but go back up just a little there, around about verse 5, where Nathan has just told the parable to David, and of course David says anger was greatly kindled against the man in the story, and said he deserves to die, and he shall restore the lamb fourfold because he did this thing, because he had no pity. So that's an important point we'll look at in a few minutes. But of course, then Nathan said, "You are the man." In verse 10 here, Nathan starts to tell him what the sentence basically is going to be, what's he going to have to do because of what he has done. And verse 10 says, "Now therefore the sword shall never depart from your house, because you have despised me and have taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your wife. Thus says the Lord, behold, I will raise up evil against you out of your own house. I will take your wives before your eyes and give them to your neighbor, and he shall lie with them sacrifice in the sight of the sun. For you did it secretly, but he will do this thing before all Israel and before the sun. David said to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. And Nathan said to David, the Lord has put away your sin, you shall not die. Nevertheless, because of this deed, you have utterly scorned the Lord, and the child who is born to you shall die. Then Nathan went down to his house. So let's back up and talk about that just a little bit. One thing he mentions here is that David pronounced his judgment as king he would, and that was that this person would deserve to die for doing this thing. And that also he would restore the lamb fourfold. Now, that goes back to Old Testament law, Levitical law. That's how they did things. Which we read in the New Testament, Romans 6:23 says the wages of sin is death. So we know that he said he deserves to die. We all sin. We all deserve to die. But Exodus 22:11 talks there about the very specific laws about when you do certain things, it's what the punishment will be for those. And one of those in 22 was set as you shall repay 4 sheep for a sheep. So David was quoting back what the standard was of what the penalty was supposed to be. That you replace 4 sheep for 1 sheep. And then we also look in Luke 19:8 there where Zacchaeus is talking to Jesus. And if you remember, he says, half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I defraud anybody, I restore them fourfold. So that fourfold thing was a common Old Testament payment for sin. When you had defrauded somebody, stole something, took something, killed something, it was 4 times what you paid back for it. Okay. So let's keep that in mind as we go along. There in verse 10 he says, now therefore the sword shall never depart from your house. So here, like we said, Nathan begins to pronounce sentence for David's sins. And what we see here, and we'll talk about this over and over, is that actions and decision have consequences. When we do things, their consequences come with those. And we talk to our kids about that. We have, this is your actions. Being in the school business for years, we've had that. If you do this is what'll be the price to pay for that. So that was what we're stressing here. And the part we're going to look at as we get into this next chapter, chapter 13, is even when our sins are forgiven, there's still consequences on this earth for things that we do. We all probably have scars for something that's happened to us in our body, where we've had a surgery or an injury or something. We've got aches and pains where we had something hurt one time, So we bear those scars in our body, consequences for things that we've done, even though we may have healed or been forgiven of those things. So that's kind of where this goes. And kind of jumping ahead a little bit, when it comes to restoring fourfold, as we study ahead, we're going to see that David did that. David lost 4 sons. So he did repay fourfold for what he had done as far as sword coming to his house and losing things. So he had 4 sons, counting this unborn yet child when this is announced that's going to pass away, plus 3 of his adult children later. So he does end up paying fourfold. Look at verse 12 there. He says, for you did it secretly, but we'll do this thing before all Israel, before the sun. Let's think about that for just a minute. Do you really think that this was secret in the kingdom? That nobody knew what David had done? Probably not. Okay. If you think about, he sent people to her house. He asked somebody who she was, who Bathsheba was, sent somebody to bring her, sent somebody with a letter, told Joab. There was a lot of people who knew. And the more people who know a secret, the less it is a secret. And I heard a definition of a secret one time. A secret, somebody only tell one person at a time. Something doesn't mean you don't tell anybody. You just tell one person, they tell one person, and it just kind of keeps going. So I'm sure it was not unknown in the kingdom that this had happened. But he did try to cover it up. I was talking to Pete out before we came in. I was talking about the preacher. Said, any of his lessons you listen to, his sermons, he's going to end up getting on your toes some. We're probably going to say something tonight that's going to get on your toes a little bit. And I'm sure that's one for all of us. How many of us have not done something and then tried to cover it up? I remember I was in 3rd grade. I did something I shouldn't have done. Teacher wrote a note, and kind of like David did, sending Uriah's note back in his own hand. The teacher wrote that note and gave it to me and told me to take that home to my mama, telling her what I had done. Of course, I was riding the school bus, and I got on. One of the older kids said, I told him what happened. He said, you going to give that to your mama? I said, well, yeah, the teacher said to. He said, I wouldn't. So, of course, stupid, I listened to him, and I didn't. So, of course, teacher called Mom. She said, where's the note? I said, what note? Okay. So, then I got in even deeper trouble, so take the note. If you get in trouble, fess up, okay? I know when I was principal at middle school for a long time, we had this, which you have middle school boys, that's part of being a middle school principal, but had this one little boy. He was a little rascal. He did stuff all the time, but I could get along with him, loved him, even though he'd do things, because when you call him in and ask him, did you do this? Yeah, I did it. He wouldn't lie to you. He wouldn't try to weasel out of it. If he got caught, he told you, yeah, I did it. So what's my punishment? We'll move on, So we got along well, and, he grew and learned and got better, but I was much better than lying and trying to get out of what you had done. But David here at first, he tried to cover it up. But what made David different? Acts 13:22, it says there that David was a man after God's own heart. Okay, so what does that mean? Mean he was perfect? Absolutely not. Far from it. Probably a lot of people in the Bible who had made fewer mistakes than David did. But the thing that he did, he had a heart of repentance. Okay, he got caught. Yes, he did get caught. Nathan called him on what he did. But when he did, he was repentant. Now, he wasn't sorry that he got caught. He was actually sorry that he did it, and that's the difference. Okay, if you do something and I'm sorry I got caught, that's one thing. But if I actually am sorry for what I did, then I can correct that and I can move on. We can learn from that, and that's how God felt about David. Also there in Acts 13:22, he talked about that he replaced Saul with David. Remember Saul's mistakes? When he made mistakes, he was always trying to reason them away. Well, did you kill everybody? Yeah, I did. Well, I hear sheep. What's that? Oh, well, the people told me to bring those back, or we was going to bring those back and sacrifice. So, over and over he did that where he would not admit his mistakes. Kind of hard to work with somebody who won't admit their mistakes and try to get better. So, the thing that made David, and that made God love him so much was that when he messed up, he fessed up. And he was truthfully penitent, meaning he was willing to correct what he did and try to do better. But even if that, like we said a while ago, even when we do things, even if we try to make those right, there's still consequences to pay, and there was for David. Number one, we read, said that the sword would not be out of his house. And we mentioned the fact he was going to lose some sons over that we'll talk about in the coming chapters. But once David made that statement, I have sinned against the Lord, Nathan then said to him, the Lord also has put away your sin, you shall not die. Okay, what was the penalty under the old law for adultery and murder? Death. So he did definitely deserve to die under the law that they lived under. He could have been put to death. Okay, but because of his attitude, God had mercy on him, I believe. He thought I've still got things for you to do. Okay, and there's been a lot of discussion. I was reading this lesson a little bit and studying about what's meant there when it says in verse 13, the Lord also put away your sin. Does it say he forgave him? It doesn't say he forgave him. Under the old law, were you forgiven of sin? It was just pushed forward. And then when Christ died, all that, his blood reached all the way back to all the sins that had been done before, and everybody who lived under the old law and did it correctly and had those sins pushed ahead, then when he died, he forgave those. Now, could he have forgiven? Well, Jesus forgave. We know that. In the New Testament, before the new law came into being, we know of a couple of times when he forgave somebody. He looked at the one man and said, your sins be forgiven, instead of healing him. And he said, who are you to forgive sins? Well, I'm God. I can. It would have been easier for me to say you're forgiven or get up and walk. I said your sins are forgiven. So could he have been forgiven by God at this moment? Like I said, there's a discussion there about what that verse means. Was he forgiven, or was his sin just put away and rolled up just like everybody else was at that time? I don't know that for sure. I think either one is a possibility. Okay, you think about that. All right, you study on that and come back and tell me what you think. Okay. Then verse 14, even though you're not going to die, because of this deed you have utterly scorned the Lord, the child who is born to you shall die. Then Nathan went to his house. So here's another lesson for us out of this. We think sometimes that when I sin, that's my life. I do what I want to. Okay, you hear that argument sometimes with people. This is my life. I live it like I want to. I'm not hurting anybody else, just me. Even if they know they're doing wrong, they'll still tell you that. But is that true? No, we don't live in a vacuum, and our sins affects other people, whether it's somebody that we hurt in our actions or whether it's people who love us and are hurt by watching us sin. In some shape, form, or fashion, every sin has effect on other people, not just ourselves. If it was just us, hey, okay, you choose to walk down that path, that's you. But it's not. It's not always that way. And throw out an example. There's tons of them you could think of, but something I was reading the other day, this one just hit my mind. But, family of an alcoholic father, his family suffers. Whether it's the fact that, he spends all of his money on alcohol or loses his job, or whether even if he's a good provider, still if he comes home and he is abusive to the wife and to the kids, and they hear all that fussing and going on all the time, and they live in that, instability at their home. He's doing his thing, but in the course of that, he's hurting his family. And that's just one example. There's a lot of others, okay? But that just came to my mind. So that's another lesson from this, is that when you sin, you don't just hurt yourself, but you're hurting other people around you. All right, and in the next verses, we'll read through here pretty quick. It says, and the Lord afflicted the child as your life bore to David, and he became sick. David therefore sought God on behalf of the child. What does he mean he sought God? Somebody, what do you think he meant by that? He prayed, okay? He prayed for this. Why would he do that? Did Nathan not just tell him, God said this child's going to die? As a parent, would we do anything we can to try to help our child regardless? If the doctor tells you they're terminal and there's nothing we can do, would you just accept that, or would you go to God on their behalf? You would pray. You would do everything you could, and so did he. As a good parent, you should. Okay? And I think he had a little background for that. If you read in Exodus 32 there, when Moses went up to receive the Ten Commandments, and the Israelites started, making golden calves and worshiping and doing all this thing, God was mad. He said when he came back down, he looked at him and he said, I'm just going to kill all of them. And Moses pled. He said, please don't do that. Okay? And he I don't know if we can talk God out of it, but in that story, he pled with God and he changed his mind. He relented, it said. So, there was history there, precedent where you could ask God and get him to change your mind if you're repentant enough. So David tried, and you have to give him credit for that. It says for 7 days he laid on the ground. He would not eat, would not get up, would not do anything. Just laid there and prayed and tried to get God to do something different. And then we said in 19, so when David saw the servants whispering together, he understood the child was dead, and said to his servants, is the child dead? They said he is. Then David arose from the earth, washed and anointed himself, changed his clothes, went into the house of the Lord and worshipped. Then he went to his own house, and he asked to sit before him, and he ate. The servants said to him, what is this thing you've done? They were afraid to tell him because they was afraid he had hurt himself. They was afraid he was liable to commit suicide. He was in such a state over the loss of this child. But to their surprise, when they told him he was dead and still that, he just shut off the waterworks, got up off his knees, went and washed himself, ate, and went to the temple to worship. Okay, exact opposite. Kind of befuddled them. He's like, why would you do that? They asked him. And he explains. When the child was alive, I fasted and wept, for I said, who knows whether God will be gracious to me that he may live? But now he's dead, why should I fast? Can I bring him back again? I shall go to him, but he will not return to me. Okay? And there's another lesson on this. A good example, how should we behave when we lose a loved one? Okay? Some of us just fall apart, and everybody grieves differently. That's not getting on that at all. Some people are quiet. Some people just break down. Some people just want to be left alone. Everybody handles their grief in different ways. But one thing we see here is that he did not blame God, even though God told him he was going to do it. He wasn't mad at God, apparently. Instead, he went and worshiped God. Okay, so he did the opposite of what some people would do. Instead of being angry with God when you lose a loved one, he thanked God for all he had done and went and worshiped him. And then he determined that I'm going to go be with the child. He had faith and comfort that this child was with God. And if I live my life the way I should, from here on out, I can go be with him there. So you hear that quoted at funerals a lot, and it's a great sentiment. It's how we should think. We can't change what's happened. Death is part of life, and all we can do is try to live our life so that we can be reunited in heaven someday and live eternity together. So that was his response. And also he knew, I'm king. That people was counting on me. I've got responsibilities to the ones who are alive. I've got to suck it up. I got to get up off my knees. I got to pull myself up by my bootstraps. I got to get back to work. Okay, so we see that sometimes too. We force ourselves to go on even though we may not really feel like it. And sometimes it just hits us after a while. I remember when my dad passed away, he got killed in an accident at work when I was early in college, and it was kind of a haze there for a while. Kind of accept the fact that Daddy wasn't there anymore. And probably a week after that, I was helping Mother set the table, and she had fixed supper, and I started to put down a plate, and I put one down in my dad's spot, and then it hit me. It just, all of it came to a head, and I finally realized he's not going to be sitting there to eat anymore. And I shed some tears. So that we have that point of clarity sometimes where it hits us that we accept it and we move on. I think David did that early on. All right. 24 said, then David comforted his wife Bathsheba, went in to her, lay with her, bore a son, and called his name Solomon. The Lord loved him and sent a message by Nathan the prophet, so he called his name Jedediah because of the Lord. So Solomon has two names. We always call him Solomon, but also Jedediah. Solomon, that word means peace. So it's brought peace to him and his wife, and maybe had closed out that bad chapter there in his life. And then also here, according to Nathan, through God, through Nathan, but named Blessed of the Lord. So God, special favor on Solomon, and we'll know a little bit about Solomon there. All right, let's skip down to the last part. Now, Joab fought against Rahab of the Ammonites and took the royal city and sent messengers to David and said, I fought against Rahab, moreover, I have taken the city's waters. Now then, gather the rest of the people, come together and camp against the city and take it, lest I take the city and it be called by my name. Well, Joab was captain of David's army. He was his military leader. He was also his nephew, so there was blood relation there, but he was very loyal to David. What had happened when David was young and he started winning battles for Saul? Who got the credit? David did. You remember what the ladies were singing when he come back into town. Saul's killed his thousands, David's his 10,000s. In my opinion, Joab here, he didn't want to see that happen. He said, I'm your humble servant. I'm your nephew. I'm the leader of the army, but you're the king. I've got them bottled up. You need to come and finish this so you get the credit. I don't want to get the credit. Okay, maybe he understood that there was a little bit of unrest in the kingdom because of what went on, and maybe David needed a win here to kind of pull everybody back together and get them back on his side. I don't know. But anyway, that's what Joab did. It says, I have taken the cities of water. In other words, he had taken the city's water supply. And once you took their water, especially in that climate, it wasn't going to be long until they'd have to give up. Okay, you can't live without water very long. All right. Me and Pete know all about that, don't we? All right. It says he took the crown off the king from the head. The weight of it was a talent. So that's about 75 to 100 pounds. That's a lot of gold, according to what I've read. And there was a precious stone in it, placed it on David's head. Now, some commentators will tell you that was not the actual king's crown. It was a crown on some idol they had or something, and that they took that. I don't know. Okay, but just throwing that out there for you to think about. Okay, but it was a huge crown, and it was significant in a signal that they had defeated the Ammonites. I said, then he brought all the people out, set them to labor with saws, iron picks, iron axes, made them toil with the brick kilns. Thus he did to all the cities of the Ammonites. And David and all the people returned to Jerusalem. Okay, so just a few points I want us to go back, rehash a little bit from last time. Now let's get into chapter 13. One of the big shifts you see here as you study about the life of David is pretty much up to this point, everything he did, everything he touched turned to gold. I mean, everything he did was successful. He was always getting praise. He was always winning all the battles. Everything was going great for the most part. But after the sin here with Bathsheba and killing Uriah, even though God put that sin away, it says, his life seemed to take a turn, and kind of a downturn for the rest of his life, where he had a lot of problems. And this going back to fulfill that punishment that Nathan told him was going to happen. The sword is not going to depart from your house. There's going to be problems in your life because of what you've done. Kind of like Adam and Eve, okay? You know, everything had been great before that. And then when sin entered, there was separation. He said, okay, now you're out of the garden. You have to work, sweat of your brow. So I think that kind of, to me, reminded me of that once this happened here. You still be in a good relationship with God, but things are going to be different now. So let's read there in verse 13. It says, now Absalom, David's son, had a beautiful sister whose name was Tamar. And after a time, Amnon, David's son, loved her. All right, let's just look at that for a minute. Absalom, David's son, had a beautiful sister whose name was Tamar. If you remember, these two children their mother was Micah, daughter of King Talmai of Geshur. And back in David's time in Hebron is when they were married. And she was the first bride that was really of royal lineage. She was a princess. And evidently she was a really pretty lady because everything the Bible talks about how pretty and how handsome Absalom and Tamar were. So evidently they inherited that. And we're told that David was a good-looking guy. So, they had good genetics for that. Okay? But, Absalom's famous for his long hair. He was all about, the model look, whatever, the slow motion, running through the air, blowing your hair back, whatever, So he was a pretty boy. But his sister also was beautiful. All right, and then Ammon was David's son, and his mother was Abinahab of Jezreel. And she was one of those that was taken captive back when David was in Ziklag before he came back to the kingdom, and they went and rescued her and his other wife, Abigail. So she had a son named Amnon during that time, and that was David's oldest son. So what do we know about the oldest son in royalty? What is their birthright? The throne. So he was in line. He was the prince in waiting. He was the crown prince. It was his turn to be king next. Okay? So here there was some things going on. So David had multiple wives, and if you read a little bit about how things were, those living arrangements in those days in a king's house, you had the big palace where the king lived, but then all these different wives and their kids kind of lived in other places out, maybe different wings of the palace or a different little house in the compound or somewhere in the castle, but it wasn't just all in one house. Everybody, your bedroom's down the hall, okay? It was a little different, okay? So they were separated. And I would imagine that was probably for a good reason. I lived with one woman for 35 years. She's put up with me for that long. But, I can't imagine living with more than one, okay, what that would be like. You see that show on TV about Sister Wives? That doesn't make any sense, okay? Anybody try to do that, that's crazy, okay? Anyway, so that was the situation. So Ammon, it says, was tormented that he made himself ill because of his sister. For she was a virgin, and it seemed impossible to Amnon to do anything to her. And let's go back up, though I forgot something at the end of verse 1. Amnon, David's son, loved her. And one of the problems we have in the English language is we don't have enough words for love. And when he said here he loved her, that's not what they mean. Okay, he lusted after her. Okay, he wanted her physically. It was not a love thing. It was a lustful thing. She was beautiful, and he wanted her. Okay, and he was tormented because he knew he couldn't have her. All right? So he was miserable, but he had kind of accepted that. But then along comes his friend. Okay? If you want to call him a friend, he was not much of a friend by what he did. Amnon had a friend whose name was Jonadab, the son of Shemiah, David's brother. So this was his first cousin. I don't know about y'all, but I had cousins. And I'm the oldest of three boys, and me and two of my cousins were more kind of like brothers. We just didn't live in the same house, but we were together a lot. And when we were together, a lot of times it was trouble. Okay? We burnt the woods off one time when we was camping. We caught the woods on fire. Get in trouble for that. We made a bomb one time out of everything we could think of that was flammable. We put in a glass jar and put a wick. And we tried blowing that up. So we did a lot of stupid stuff. Okay, fell out of trees, fell off horses, all kind of things. So here he was his cousin, and his cousin was kind of like my cousins. It was not a good influence. Okay, they were going to get in some trouble. Says he was very crafty, and he said to him, "O son of a king, why are you so haggard this morning? Will you not tell me?" He says, "I love Tamar, my brother, Absalom's sister." And so he came up with a plan. He said, "Lie down in your bed, pretend to be ill. When your father comes to see him, tell my sister Tamar to come and give me bread to eat, prepare food in my sight, that I may see it and eat it from her hand." So he plotted a plan here, and he went along with it. Okay, he didn't have to, but he liked the sound of that. Okay, I've been trying to figure out a way to make this happen. That's the idea. Let's go with that. So sure enough, pretended to be ill. When David came to see him, he says, "Please let my sister come and make a couple of cakes in my sight that I may eat from her hand." So then David said, "Go to your brother Amnon's house and prepare food for him." So Tamar went to her brother Amnon's house where he was lying down, took the dough and kneaded it, and made cakes in his sight and baked the cakes. And she took the pan and emptied it before him, but he refused to eat. And Amnon said, "Send out everyone from me." So everyone went out in front of him. And when Amon said to Tamar, bring the food into the chamber that I may eat from your hand. So Tamar evidently was young and naive and trusting. She didn't see any of this plot coming, okay? She was just there. Her dad said, go help out your half-brother. He's sick, go take care of him. So she went. She didn't have a clue what was going, evidently. So Tamar took the cakes she had made and brought them to the chamber to Amon, her brother. When she had brought them near, he took hold of her and said to her, come lie with me, my sister. And she answered him, no, my brother, do not violate me, for such a thing is not done in Israel. Do not do this outrageous thing. As for me, where could I carry my shame? And as for you, you would be one of the outrageous fools in Israel. Now, therefore, please speak to the king, for he will not withhold me from you. So, kind of like the story of Joseph when he was into his master's wife tried to seduce him. Same thing here, and he ran and got away. The problem was David was bigger and stronger than her, and he could get away. Tamar could not. So she was not able to physically get away, but so she tried to outsmart him, tried to reason with him and tell him, we can't do this. This is wrong. And she told him all the reasons that it was. He said, this is, this thing is not done in Israel. How is this going to look, okay, when this happens within the king's family, when this kind of stuff is going on? This shouldn't happen. As for me, where could I carry my shame? In those days, purity was very important. Should be today, but let's face it, in our society today, that's not as big as it used to be. It used to be a big deal if somebody, especially a girl, not fair both ways, but truth, that was shameful. They didn't want anybody to know if they had sex outside of marriage. Now, not so big a deal. I even hear young people talk about, brag about their body count, they call it. How many people have I slept with who had the biggest number? So far away from how it was. But in those days, that was a terrible thing. And it would have been a terrible shame to her for that to happen. And a young woman who had been deflowered, or lost her virginity, was damaged goods, and she was not suitable to be married to a respectable man. So basically it was going to ruin her life if that happened. So she tried to beg him, this is going to be terrible for me. Don't do that. And also going to be bad for you. And she even told him, speak to the king, because he will not withhold me from you. I'm not so sure about that, whether that was true or she was just trying to reason with him. Okay. Says 14, but he would not listen to her, and being stronger than she, he violated her and lay with her. In other words, he raped her. Then Amnon hated her with great hatred, so that the hatred with which he hated her was greater than the love with which he had loved her. And Amnon said to her, get up, go. But she said to him, no, my brother, for this wrong and sending me away is greater than that other thing you did to me. But he wouldn't listen to her. He called the young men to serve him and said, put this woman out of my presence, and bolt the door after her. So once he had fulfilled his lust, he had nothing for her. Okay, she was to him damaged goods, even though he's the one who damaged her. Okay, Exodus 22:6 talks about there where what the laws were again. If a man seduced a virgin, that by law what he should do is pay the dowry, the bride price to her family, and then marry her. Okay, to save her. If they were not engaged and this happened, they had a moment of passion, whatever, and lost their senses there for a little while, there was a way you could handle that, pay that dowry price and marry her. We've heard of shotgun weddings, okay? Basically shotgun wedding. That was what was supposed to happen. He didn't do that. He kicked her out. He said, get up, go. So it kind of shows you what kind of person he was, okay? She's bad way to say it, but it's kind of like he'd chew a piece of gum till the flavor's gone, and he'd just spit it out. Okay, I've got all the good out of it. I'm done with you. Okay, out of my sight. And I used to know a guy I used to work with, and he had done something similar to this, and he told me, he said, it was all about, couldn't wait to sleep with this woman, and then when we did, it's just like, as soon as it was done, I was like, leave, get away. It was seeing her shamed him. He knew she was a reminder of what he had done bad. Okay, so nothing good comes out of these. All right, so he did not do what he should have. He raped his half sister, and then after that, he made it even worse by the way he followed up. Okay, so it says now she was wearing a long robe with sleeves, for thus were the virgin daughters of the king dressed. So his servant put her out and bolted the door after her. And Tamar put ashes on her head and tore the long robe that she wore, laid her head on her head, and went away, crying aloud as she went. So they had certain clothing that they wore that signified who they were, that she was a virgin of the king's house. And it was long to cover up and be, and some things you read here says laid her hand on her head. Maybe she was supposed to wear a veil in public, I'm not sure, but she didn't have that. I mean, she was just in terrible shape, but she just crying went home. And her brother Absalom, when he saw her, said, "Has Amnon, your brother, been with you?" Is that not a strange question? When you read that, does that not strike you as odd? Why would he, as soon as he saw her in that frame of mind, why would he ask her, did Amnon do this? Evidently, Amnon had a reputation. I'm thinking this was probably not the first time he's done things like this. He probably had a playboy reputation, or somebody who was not respectful to women, whatever. And that was so when he saw this and he knew that she had been there, he had a pretty good idea, put two and two together without asking, knew what had happened to her. So Tamar then, it said, lived a desolate or disgraced woman in her brother Absalom's house. So Absalom took her in. She was not a candidate really to be married now. So he took her into his house and he said, I'll care for you. When King David heard of these things, he was very angry. But Absalom spoke to Amnon neither good nor bad, for Absalom hated Amnon because he had violated his sister Tamar. So another odd thing we see here is David's response. David heard about it. And it says when he did, he was very angry. But what did he do? We don't see that he did anything. Okay, why not? Why would he not do something? I don't know. We can speculate. Amnon was his oldest son. He was the heir apparent to the throne. David loved his children. We saw that over and over. He was a very loving person. And for some reason, he just couldn't bring himself to confront him and deal with it. Two possibilities. Number one, he just loved him too much. That's not an answer, but maybe. But the other thing was, maybe it was his guilt over his sin of a sexual nature that he couldn't deal with this because of what he had done. He said, I'm going to feel like a hypocrite if I come down on him for doing this when I have done similar. So he just kind of let it lie. Okay? How many of us have been guilty of that? It's hard to, the hardest person to think bad about when they do something is ourselves. Okay? We can kind of reason away why we did something. Well, I'm not really a bad guy. I made a mistake, whatever. But the next one is our family, okay? And we love our family. We don't want to condemn our family. We don't want to come down on them sometimes. How many of us have been guilty of maybe having sin in our family and we haven't come down on it hard enough and hadn't dealt with it? I raise my hand. Okay? I've got family members who have done things and doing things that I've talked about them with it, but, this lesson made me think as I was preparing for it, kind of stepped on my own toes. Am I really doing enough for that? Am I really taking a strong enough stance with them about what they're doing and what they've done? And my answer to that myself is probably not, and I need to do a better job. Okay. One glaring example that jumps out, not my family, but I know a family that when we were living before we moved here, but family, country folks, conservative all the way, and they had 3 sons, and one of them moved away, and like people do when they move away, they kind of go their own way there, but he turned out just to be a flaming homosexual. And I thought, whoa, I bet they're really not proud of that. But no, my wife showed me pictures on Facebook, him and his boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever they call each other. It was all just so proud that he's come out, how brave. I was shocked. Like, I can't believe that this family took that stance on this issue. But, they said we probably all have done that, maybe not for that particular sin, but sin. They've done something else, same, but they were all about being accepting of him. And it was, like I said, I was floored by their reaction to that. I did not expect that from them when that happened. So how do we deal with those things? And David had an issue, and this issue come back to bite him many times over. So let's look in verse 23. 23 says, after 2 full years, Absalom had sheep shears at Baal-hazor, which is near Ephraim, and Absalom invited all the king's sons. And Absalom came to the king and said, behold, your servant has sheep shears. Please let the king and his servants go with your servant. But the king said to Absalom, no, my son, let us not all go, lest we be burdensome to you. He pressed him, but he would not go, but gave him his blessing. So in those days, when you had a big sheep shearing, they made a big party of it at the end. There would be a big feast, okay? And all the hard work was done, I can remember when I was little, some of my family, on mother's side, it was cold weather, and they had hog killing, okay? They killed and butchered a hog and had the big pot boiling out there, and they pulled that hog up in a tree and had all the, making the chitlins and boiling everything in that big iron pot. It was a big family party. They were reaping the rewards of raising that hog and put it away for the winter. Okay, that's kind of what this was in a way. But he was going to have a big party after this, so he invited his dad and all of them to come down. But David didn't go. He said, lest we be burdensome to you. So he thought, well, maybe there's too much. You don't have to do that. But so he said, if not, please let my brother Amon go with us. And the king said to him, why should he go with you? So I think David had a clue here that something was not right. He smelled something fishy. He was not going. But then when Absalom said, well, hey, let Amon go, he said, why do you want him to go? Okay, but it had been 2 years and he had not said a word about any of this, so he was kind of just buying his time, plotting his revenge, and when the time came, he was going to take advantage of it. But up to this point, he had not done or said anything to arouse suspicion that he had any plans for revenge. But again, David kind of let that slide. Pressed him and all the king's sons go with him. Then Absalom commanded his servants, mark when Amnon's heart is merry with wine, and when I say to you, strike Amnon, then kill him. Do not fear, have I not commanded you, be courageous and valiant. So the plan here had been hatched that he'd been working on for a couple of years. He's like, I'll get you back at some point. So now is my time. This place where he was 15, 20 miles out of Jerusalem, farther out, away from the king and anybody there who would kind of be protection. He was on his own ground, on his turf here. So he told his servants, he said, when we have this big meal, when he's drunk a lot of wine, he's kind of not at himself, that's when you're going to strike. So the servants of Absalom did to Amnon as Absalom had commanded. Then all the king's sons arose, and each mounted his mule and fled. While they were on the way, news came to David, Absalom has struck down all the king's sons, and not one of them is left. Okay, so the other sons, when they saw what had happened, they ran. Okay, because if he's killed one brother, maybe he's planning to kill us all. Because that was not uncommon all throughout history, is when you had a change in leadership, it was not bloodless. Okay, there was a lot, had to get rid of your rivals. Anybody that could contest you on the throne, a lot of times you would kill them. Some of y'all may have saw this. I was watching a thing back last week, but I kind of like to see about archaeology stuff. But the terracotta warriors in China, when they found those a few years ago, they dug it up, and there was this burial mound for one of the emperors of China way back, 1,500, 2,000 years ago. I forget how it was, but they dug it, and they found there was like 8,000 warriors, life-size statues, basically, that they had made to protect him in the afterlife. And they started talking to the guy who had found these. He said, yeah, we found them, but everybody doesn't know this, but they were not in one piece. They had been busted. Somebody had come in there, and they did an investigation. They didn't just get broke over time. Somebody came in there and tore them up with a club, whatever. So they started digging and finding out, and going back in history, there was a coup, basically, where the emperor had died, and then the son who was supposed to be next in line, the son under him decided he wanted to be king instead, and it was just a back and forth drama kind of like this, where I'm going to kill you because you can be a threat to me on the throne, and all that resulted from that. And they're still sorting that out if you want to read that story about all that. But I thought that was pretty interesting, but it applies to this. So they were afraid that, hey, he killed him, maybe he's going to kill us. So they fled and went back to David. But bad news travels fast. Before they could even get there, somebody had already told. How is that possible? I don't know. They run and jumped on on their mount and took off. But before they could get there, somebody else had already told David that it happened. But like a lot of rumors, was it true? Not completely. It was fake news, okay? You can't believe anything you hear, only half of what you see. Okay, so that it was not true. They killed one, but not all of them. Then the king arose and tore his garments and lay on the earth, and all his servants who were standing by tore their garments. But Jonadab, the son of Shemaiah, David's brother, said, "Let not my lord suppose that they have killed all the young men, the king's sons, for Amnon alone is dead. For by the command of Absalom this has been determined from the day he violated his sister Tamar. Now therefore let not my lord the king so take it hard as suppose that all the king's sons are dead, for Amnon alone is dead." So who set the record straight here? Maybe this is a clue to how the word got back so fast. Who was it told David that it wasn't all of them killed, just the one? Look at the name. There in, where are we at? Verse 32. Jonadab, the same one who was plotting to get the rape set up, he was the one who told David what happened. So I got a strong suspicion that he already knew this was going to happen. And he wasn't there, but he was back with David. And he told him, says, this is what happened. It wouldn't, they're all not all dead. Evidently David didn't question him, how do you know this? But he did. So I'm kind of thinking maybe that he was in on this plot too. And whether he set it up and organized it or not, I don't know. But he knew. And he also knew that this had been something that he had been plotting ever since the rape, that he was going to do this. So he had inside information on the situation. So if I was picking friends, I would not pick Jonadab, okay, because he seems to always know what bad stuff is going on. He seems to be in it some shape, form, or fashion, But maybe, it's to keep your friends close and your enemies closer. Maybe he was just keeping him close, keep an eye on him, but he knew. Okay. All right. Verse 34. But Absalom fled, and the young man who kept the watch lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, many people were coming from the road behind him by the side of the mountain. And Jonadab said to the king, "Behold, the king's sons have come, as your servant said, so it has come about." So Absalom, he got out of town. So he knew that he was going to be in trouble for what he had done from David, for killing David's son. Because he knew that David had not punished him to begin with, so he was not going to be happy that somebody else had done it for him. Okay, which not a defense here, but when you don't take care of things, somebody else does a lot of times, and they don't handle it right. So if David had handled this to begin with, this probably would not have happened. So some of this probably lays at David's feet for not handling his business. As a leader, you have to make tough decisions. It's like the lesson this morning from Ben. He talked about, the invasion of D-Day. Those guys that dropped in behind enemy lines, there's a good chance 80% of them was going to be killed. And the general took credit for that. He said, I made the decision. It's a hard decision. I'll have to be the one who answers for it if it doesn't work. And even though if it does work, we're going to lose a lot of men, a lot of good men. I'm going to have to tell their families I'm the one who decided to do this, to attack. So in my opinion, David should have manned up and done something about this when it happened, but he didn't. But again, Jonadab here is trying to get in on the side here of the king and, kind of be the good guy now that all this has come about. And as soon as he has finished speaking, behold, the king's sons came and lifted up their voice and wept. And the king also and all his servants wept very bitterly. But Absalom fled and went to Talmai, the son of Ammihud, king of Geshur. And David mourned for his son day after day. Let's look at that for just a minute. Okay, so they all came back. They were upset, of course. They saw this happen and very tore up about the whole situation. And Absalom fled, but where did he go? Well, you remember we talked about the first lesson. Who was his family? His mother was a princess here of Talmai. So when he got in trouble, he went back to his grandpa's house. I'm not welcome here in David's house anymore. I'll go back to my grandparents. Okay, we see that sometimes. Kids getting mad at mom and dad. I want to go stay with grandma. Okay, because grandma usually gives what you want. That's kind of definition of grandma. Okay, spoils you and sends you back home. But You know, he's like, I'm going to my grandparents' house. They'll protect me and keep me till all this blows over. So that's where he went. It says he was there for 3 years, so a long time. And the spirit of the king longed to go out to Absalom because he was comforted about Amnon since he was dead. So again, we see the same attitude out of David. Okay, over time, time heals all wounds. Maybe he kind of got over Amnon's death, but he still mourned and longed for Absalom and wanted him to come back after all he had done. Okay, he mourned Amnon even though he had raped his sister, and now he mourned Absalom even though he had killed his brother. So again, he's not willing to, in my opinion, step up and make the tough decisions here and put sin out. We talked about the rules under the old law. Why did they do that? Why did they stone people when they did these things? It said to put sin out of the camp. So, if somebody did something bad enough, Lord's Supper's prepared across the way. It's getting about that time. So if you have not had the opportunity to take the Lord's Supper, you can finish that part of your worship as soon as we finish here. But again, here, David, even though all Absalom had done, he still loved him. He still was willing to forgive him and was missing him and wanted him back. Now, it gets a little bit more complicated. Ben will talk about that when he comes back next week. But how that happens and what goes from there, it's an ongoing, one of these made-for-movie TV series. It's not a one-night movie. It's a whole series that's going to go for a while until all the little twists and turns that happens. But there's more to the story. But again, we sit here, we're to the point where David has kind of lost that golden touch, and even though he's still a man after God's own heart, that his life has kind of took a downturn here, and all those things that Nathan told him God promised was going to happen to him. Sword will not leave your house, and there'll be problems within your own family. Those things are coming to pass, and even though he's been forgiven or his sins pushed forward, whatever, he's still got problems to deal with because of things he had done. All right, appreciate your attention. And everybody being here tonight. Like I said, hopefully next week Ben should be back, and let him take it up from there. Thank you for your attention. If you bow your heads, we'll say a quick prayer and we'll begin. Father, thank you for tonight. Thank you for this opportunity we've had to come and worship you, to study another portion of the Word. Pray, Father, that you would help us with those things that we've heard tonight, that we might think on them, and we take the lessons that we could learn from these and apply them to ourselves, and to see how we could become better people and better service to thine. Father, be with the ones who are not able to be with us tonight, those of sickness, those lost loved ones, especially those who are away on traveling for your cause. Bless them and keep us safe till we meet again. All these prayers we ask in Christ's name. Amen.